Well, howdy do, Buckaroos. How are you? So we're here in a later session of the Beer Whisperer Pub today. The theme is Make It a Double. And so what I'm having here is kind of an old school. I had some Turkey 101 here. And I have several wild turkey glasses, but I'm not using one. I've got a Canadian Club glass my wife had found, and I don't have any Canadian Club. I'm going to have to get some just so I can pair the whiskey with the glass. But it's a nice glass, got a nice solid bottom on it. It's a perfect rocks glass. So how about yourself, Red? What are you pouring?
Well, hello, Tom. How are you? I'm doing pretty much the same thing as you. Normally, I start with a beer, but as a tribute to our friends in the Great White North, I've got myself some Crown Royal Black, which is
Oh, there we
basically
go.
it's basically Crown Royal, but it's kind of the 90 proof version of it. It's aged in charred oak barrels, and it's a blended Canadian whiskey. And I think it's a very good one. I think I said to you this before, and when we were talking with Jeff, that I kind of grew up with Canadian whiskey my whole life, and I'm a big fan of Canadian whiskey, and big fan of Canada. I understand that you met a new friend. You've got a new friend from Canada. You want to explain?
Well, I had a friend from Canada. I don't know what happened. Oh, my cat just knocked something down. I had a friend. Well, I've got several friends in Canada actually, on various social media. But there's one in particular that I did have as a friend on social media, and for whatever reason they unfriended me on various. I'm still not even sure why. And made a comment. He attacked a friend on a video, so I made a comment about it, and he just proceeded to call me all sorts of names. And then when I asked him about it, I mean, he just kept calling me more names. He couldn't come up with an articulate answer. All he could do was, call me names and hurl insults at me and, use expletives. So I don't know. I don't know what happened. I think that, we were talking a little bit about this with David Scott on the last session. I think, I mean, social media has just allowed people to have this cowardly behavior. I mean, you can agree with somebody 100 times and leave positive comments on their videos and posts. And if you leave a couple comments that they don't even have to be insulting. You just have to disagree with their opinion, and they're going to unfriend you for whatever reason. And they won't even tell you why. It's just cowardly behavior.
Well, I think social media is kind of a bizarro world to begin with. It really is detached from a lot of reality, and you've got to understand that a lot of times on this social media stuff, people set up these net personas, and they're probably not really like that in real life. Of course, some of these people, and you're absolutely right, wouldn't be so vicious if you were talking to somebody in person. But people that come on to things like Facebook and YouTube and want to be critics and beer reviewers and whiskey reviewers or any kind of reviewers, you need to grow a thick skin because you're going to have people out there that's going to be critical. And because of the detached and bizarre and warped nature of it, you're going to have people that are going to spew a lot of venom that they normally probably wouldn't. So you just have to take it with a grain of salt and understand that, you're coming from something that's not really reality. So, I don't put a lot of stock in it. I don't get, offended really too much because I'm like, I don't know these people. These people don't know me. What bearing do they really have in your life? They don't have any. So it's like, their existence on the planet is really pretty much meaningless. So, if you don't mind, they don't matter. So who cares what their opinion is, Tom, really, when you think about it?
Yeah, and Dave and I were talking about that too. Dave and the beer professor had recently had some personal loss. He lost some family members very close to him, and of course, you all know our story. We lost our son to cancer about 3 years ago, and we were both talking. So the worst thing that could happen to us already has. Everything else is little stuff, but some of these folks just take this stuff so serious, like it's important. I mean, look, hey, if I insulted you, hey, I didn't necessarily mean to, but
I'm
it
gonna
used
go.
to be
Just you
friends
just
could
have
have
to.
a difference of opinion and still be friends. So I don't know.
Yeah,
Again,
I don't know.
it just breeds this cowardly behavior.
Yes, and I agree with you. And just always take it from the perspective that I do. This is not reality. This is kind of a bizarro world. This is a warped version of what is real. So, I mean, people have a lot of preconceptions, and there's a lot of misinformation, and there's a lot of things that you think is true might not be true. Who knows? You
Well,
really there's no way. There's really no way to tell. But in some instances, when things are documented and there's facts about things that are just public information that you can just find out yourself in a couple keystrokes. I mean, sometimes you have to call people on things that are our reality and are real and say, hey, look, I'm basing my opinions on what I'm seeing in the real world. So there you
yeah.
go.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know why this person decided to go off the way he did. I mean, I don't know, for whatever reason, he felt he needed to put it out there on the record for whatever reason. But the truth is, I don't mind. I mean, he said what he said, and it was me. So if anything else, what he's done is established a pattern of behavior, because I bet he's done this to other folks. So I think at some point it's going to be clear that this person is just a mean-spirited individual. But anyway, hey, I want to ask you a question about your whiskey, though. I've had several versions of Crown, but I hadn't had that black. It is, from what I understand, it's supposed to be a bolder version, almost closer to a bourbon. Is that correct?
It is very bourbon-esque, yes, and it's definitely benefiting from being in the charred oak barrels, and it is a 90 proof blended Canadian whiskey. And as we've discussed with Canadian whiskeys, and you've said this yourself, they have that spicy rye note to them.
Mm-hmm.
They're rye forward with that, the rye in Canadian whiskeys, which I like a lot. It reminds me of a very good bourbon, but again, it's got more of that rye character. So you could say it almost tastes like a rye whiskey, which
Gotcha.
is very nice as well. It's a very good drink. I'm drinking it neat. I'm sipping it slowly. I'm drinking it with a porter, and it's just pairing very well.
Well, I'm kind of going old school as kind of an homage to my dad. Wild Turkey was one of the three bourbons he drank: Jim Beam, Jack Daniels, and Turkey. When he really wanted to tie one on, that was the word he'd use. So I'm going to tie one on. Uh, this is what he wanted to have, Wild Turkey. Now, Dad always, uh,
Oh, that's
with
great.
water, what he would do is take a glass, add about 3 or 4 ice cubes, put probably 2 to 3 ounces of the whiskey in there, and a nice splash of water. I've got about a double shot here on the rocks, so I'm just going on the rocks. But he liked his with water.
Yeah, and I was, when we were talking about Jeff, with Jeff the last time about Canadian whiskeys being so prevalent in New England. My father really wasn't a bourbon drinker. My father was a Canadian whiskey drinker, an Irish whiskey drinker, and an American whiskey drinker. He drank rye. He drank this rock gut shit that he loved. It was called Fleischmann's.
Fleischmann.
You
Oh
didn't need to
yeah,
look it up. He loved that stuff, and of course, he used to mix it with highballs. But my old man was very big on drinking whiskey straight, and he loved the Canadian whiskeys. I can always remember him drinking Canadian Club, and he loved this. And Jeff had it not too long ago. This Yukon Jack. It's like a spiced
mm-hmm.
Canadian liquor. It's like 100 proof, but it's kind of like their version of Southern Comfort, but it's a Canadian
Yeah.
version of 100 proof spiced Canadian whiskey. And my father would go through nips of that like there was no tomorrow. I mean, used to see in his truck, he was a construction worker. He used to tell us, go clean out my truck. And we go clean his truck out. And you would find dozens and dozens of these nips like laying in the back seat of his truck. So, he was like, when he was stopping at the liquor store, he was buying a couple pops of them, and he would knock them back. But he loved that Yukon Jack. Boy, he loved that.
I used to drink a lot of Yukon Jack in my early 20s. Now I've tried to drink it recently, and it's a little sweet for me. But yeah, it's similar to Southern Comfort. It's higher proof and not quite as sweet as Southern Comfort, but it's very sweet.
He loved it. He loved that, and he was a big fan of Seagram's VO. I remember him drinking that a lot.
Well,
And Canadian Club was his thing. He was a big Canadian Club drinker. So,
there you go.
you
Here's the.
know,
Let me show you that glass. Canadian.
that's awesome. Yeah, yeah. Canadian whiskey is very, very, very popular in New England states. More so even where Jeff is in New Hampshire, Maine, Vermont, but even in Rhode Island, Connecticut, Massachusetts. You go to any kind of liquor store in these states, and you will see very prominent displays of Canadian whiskeys.
Very nice. Yeah, you know what? I was probably, gosh, I might have even been in my 30s, to be honest with you, before I'd even had Canadian whiskey.
Oh, really? Yeah. See, like I said, it was where I grew up. It's so prevalent. You used to see it everywhere, every bar. The classic highball was CC and ginger. It was a Canadian Club and ginger ale. My mom, who's not a drinker, she was a teetotaler. She would go, and that was her drink, CC and ginger.
My mom would drink Jim Beam and Seven, or she liked Southern Comfort and Seven, which, well, now when I think about it now, I mean, that'd be very syrupy, but I remember her drinking a Southern Comfort and 7 Up highball when I was a kid.
Yeah, and Canadian beers were very popular, as Jeff was saying. It was funny when he was talking about all these Canadian beers, when he was reminiscing about the older Canadian beer brands,
Hmm.
and drinking Lauren Tide and Molson Brador and all that. And I remember myself drinking all those beers, and remember us, going up to Montreal. I mean, have you been to Canada, Tom?
Yes, I have.
Okay, yeah, it's Canada. Where I grew up, even in Rhode Island, Canada, you could do it in a day to get up there, and probably have to stay over. But Canada's not too far, even from southern New England. So we used to go to Canada. I mean, we go on vacations. We go where your buddy lives, Nova Scotia. So yeah, I've been to Canada many times. Montreal a lot. We used to even have trips with bars and stuff like that. And even my father, with his Union Hall, they would take trips to go see the Boston Bruins play the Montreal Canadiens up in Canada and all that stuff. So, it was Canada's great. I love Canada. I love Quebec. I mean, that's really the only part of Canada that I've really spent any kind of amount of time in. Of course, I've been to the Maritimes. I've been to Newfoundland, and I've been to Nova Scotia. So, beautiful country for the most part, very friendly, very beautiful people. So, you get a couple angry Canadians, I guess, every now and then. But
Well, I've
for the
never
most
been to
part,
that part of Canada. My brother lives in Bellingham, Washington, which is about, I don't know, about 45 minutes out of Vancouver, BC.
yeah, on the West Coast, yeah, it's beautiful. That's
And
gorgeous up there too.
I don't know, I guess not quite, about 22, 23 years ago, I suppose. Uh, I don't know, 20, gosh, about 20 years ago. About 20 years ago, my wife, daughter, and I visited up there. We went up into BC and Victoria and that
British
sort of
Columbia
thing.
is gorgeous, yeah, and Vancouver Islands is gorgeous. And actually, one of my cousins was born in Canada. My uncle was a university professor. He taught chemistry, and back in the 70s, he taught at the University of Saskatchewan. So he lived in Saskatchewan for a number of years teaching. And my youngest cousin, his daughter, was actually born in Saskatchewan. So I actually have one of my cousins is actually a Canadian.
Well, how about that? Well, I remember, well, when I'm going to say I was of legal age just for the purpose of this video. But I remember the first time I had Molson Canadian. I thought that was one of the best beers I'd ever had. But in 1987, I moved up and lived with my brother for about 2 years. And that was the first time that I'd seen Molson Canadian. It wasn't available in my neck of the woods in California where I grew up. But I remember having Molson Canadian a lot because on the weekends, all the bars would put it on sale for $1 because the Canadians would come down to the States to go shopping over the weekend. So everything Canadian would be on sale every weekend. So I drink Molson Canadian for $1.
It's funny when I was growing up, and this was like a luxury for us because we had all the American swills. But when we were underage and we wanted to drink, high shelf kind of stuff that we thought was high shelf anyway, was Molson Golden Ale.
Yeah, the Molson Golden. Yep, that was the one. The first time I had Molson Golden, a friend of mine and I drove down to Del Mar. His dad worked as a starter for the racetracks on the circuit. So we went to that Del Mar racetrack, and when he wasn't working, we got a 6-pack of Molson Golden, and that was the first time I'd had Molson Golden. And I thought that was the cleanest, crispest beer that I'd ever had at that time in my life.
It's kind of sort of like a hybrid. It's supposed to be, if I'm not mistaken, a blend between ale and lager. But I remember we used to love that beer, and we would plow through cases upon cases of Molson Golden Ale. O'Keefe was another ale that we used to drink a lot. O'Keefe was very good, and we used to drink. What was the other? Of course, Moosehead was another one that we used to drink, and there was another one called Grizzly, I think. And I remember Jeff was talking about all these ones as well. I didn't.
Grizzly, Calgary.
I don't remember. Well, Calgary, that's the Western Canada, or that's the Central Province in Canada, I think. I don't think we ever got that. We got all the stuff from Quebec, not even stuff from Toronto, pretty much. But we, Lauren Tide, I actually remember drinking that in Montreal. And Jeff used to say he would get that, but we didn't see that in Rhode Island. But we used to get a ton of Molson, a ton of O'Keefe, and I think we used to get Labatt, but Labatt wasn't as popular as Molson was. But I have a good story about once John and I went to Montreal together. We were college classmates, and we both took French in college as a second language, and we were in the French club. Well, I wasn't in the French club, but I joined the French club when I found out I got a free trip to Montreal. So we went up to Montreal, and we had Labatt Blue on draft at this place once, and they must have just tapped the keg. But when this beer was ice cold and fresh, I got to tell you, I still remember to this day how good that beer was, because him and I were walking around the city, and it was very warm, and we were sweating like pigs. And we went in, we had this Labatt Blue, and this Labatt Blue was just fantastic. Of course, my palate's changed a lot since then, but I remember how good that beer tasted. And whenever you talk to John, and if John watches this, he'll tell you the same thing, that Labatt Blue on draft at this bar in Montreal. I don't even remember where we were, but it was great.
I drank a lot of Labatt Blue back in the 80s. I remember back then, though, Canadian beer was thought to be a cut above. I think now it's thought of not so much. And again, I don't know if it's had the same problem that iconic American brands have, meaning that I don't know if some of the brewing process has changed. I don't know if the ingredients have changed. But I remember back in the 80s, even into the 90s, Canadian beer was really thought to be a whole lot better than American beer.
Oh, it was. It was. The quality of the Canadian beers, the Canadian macros were a step cut above the American ones. There was no question that the Canadian beers were better beers. They had more malt body. They had more hop character. They had more alcohol. They had more everything. It was just a better product. Canadian macro lager, and I think still to this day, is much better than any American craft beer. I'm not craft beer, any macro swill that you'll get, guaranteed. I would, if someone gave me a choice between a Molson Gold and a Labatt Blue versus a Miller High Life, or what else, a Budweiser or something, I would take the Canadian one 10 out of 10 times.
Yeah, of course, way back then we weren't thinking about a rope. Yeah.
Talk about that for a minute, because I got to excuse myself.
Okay.
I just was drinking. I have to go to the bathroom.
All right, go ahead. Well, I'll just keep talking. I'll just tell the story anyway. We used to think, I mean, of course, you never thought about aromas much back then. So, but I do. That's one thing I remember about the Molson Golden, though. I remember it being much more aromatic than the other American beers that we could get at the time. And I was trying to remember what Canadian beers I could get in California at the time. I know there was Molson Golden, Labatt Blue, Grizzly I could get, Moosehead, but I hadn't had Molson Canadian until I moved up to Washington, where Molson Canadian was just everywhere. And I actually really enjoyed the Molson Canadian at the time. And I had it, I don't know, I guess about a year ago I revisited it. And it sells at my Sam's Club for about $7 a 6-pack. So I mean, it's fairly reasonable. But I could also get 12 packs of Schlafly. Excuse me, I have trouble getting comfy. Hard chair hurts my ass. Anyways, I could also get 12 packs of Schlafly for about $13. So, sometimes it's hard for me to buy a beer like that when I know I can get a extremely good quality craft beer for $13. But sometimes it's a flavor. I guess every once in a while, I want that, just not have to think about it. Just get it extremely cold and drink it very fast beer. I don't do that very often, but every once in a while, you're reminiscing and a beer like that kind of hits the spot. Right now, I'm drinking, I just poured me, this one just came out in my neck of the woods from Tallgrass Brewing Company out of Manhattan, Kansas. It's the Grizz. It's their Imperial IPA, 9.5%. 85 IBUs, I believe. And it's interesting. It reminds me a lot of the Three Floyds Arctic Panzer Wolf, if any of you have had that.
I've had that. Okay, I'm back, Tom. Yeah. Hey, have you seen the Tankard Ale that's out now from Pabst? It's the new product. Well, it's actually, a revival of an old beer, brand.
No, I've heard you guys talk about it. I've seen a few folks have videos out for it, but it hasn't hit my neck of the woods yet. I think I will pick it up.
I haven't. I have.
Red, is Pabst still its own entity?
I'm not sure on that, Tom. I'm sure people could look it up. I believe so, but I know they were bought by a Russian company, so they're owned by a Russian company now. I know that much. What I was going to say is though we talked about this too a number of videos back that Pabst was doing this. They were going to start taking a number of old school regional brands and reviving them, and Tankard Ale was one of them. So Tankard Ale is going to be nationally rolled out, just like the Ballantine IPA. I haven't seen it in my market yet, but it's supposed to be available everywhere. So I haven't gone on a beer run lately, so the next time I go on one, I'll look for it. It's going to be in King is 16-ounce cans, and it's going to be in 4-packs, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I'm going to keep looking for it, but the Ballantine products never hit my neck of the woods either. So,
oh, that's unfortunate because the Ballantine IPA, and I've said this before, and I'll say it again. To me, that is the benchmark example of what IPA is. They just blew it out of the park. A grand slam home run with that beer. That is one of the best IPAs I've ever tasted.
yeah, I
And
agree.
then,
I loved it. It was just a good classic, traditional IPA. I thought it was brilliant.
and the Burton Ale, phenomenal as well. So, I mean, 2 grand slam home runs with those beers. So I'm expecting good things with the Tankard Ale.
Yeah, I hope that gets to my neck of the woods. I really like to try it.
Well, I hope it gets to you. If it doesn't get to you, we'll try to get some out to you. And like I said, I haven't forgotten you, Tom. We'll get that Ballantine Burton out to you.
No hurry, no hurry. But yeah, man, I don't. I get PBRs, but for some reason those other products didn't hit my neck of the woods. So I'll have to look at the distribution, see what the closest distribution is. It's only a couple hours for me to get to. Oh, well, it's not even that far to get to. I could get to Oklahoma, Kansas, and Arkansas in a couple hours. So if it hits any of those markets, I can take a road trip and get them.
Yeah, well, PBR is probably their worst product. That's one that they've actually dumbed down. That beer was probably better 20 years ago than it is today. I think it's, I haven't had it probably in a couple months. I think I picked up a 6-pack of Kingers maybe a year ago or 8 months ago, just because I was doing something. And I just wanted something I wanted to knock back quick. And I went to the grocery store because it was right up the street, and I didn't feel like making a special trip. So I picked it up, and I had it ice cold, and I was knocking it back, and it tasted like shit to me. So I'm like, this isn't what I remember. I remember it being better in the 80s and the 90s. So I think PBRs, even though it's become, trendy with hipsters and all that crap, I think it's lost a step or two.
Well, it has. I mean, it's a horrible beer. I can't. There are other macros out there. If I'm going to drink a macro, I'll pick up something else. But for me, that's one of the absolute worst.
Yeah, it is, and you can't. Again, we don't. I don't want to beat a dead horse, and I don't want to sound like a broken record, but you can't have people out there saying that this is as good as craft beer, and that, relatively speaking, this is good product. It isn't. It's garbage.
Well, again, we've made this comment before, though, too. I mean, these products aren't made the same way now that they were made in the 60s. It's just not the same product. And I think a lot of folks are looking at this as it's the same beer, and it's just not.
No, it's not at all. And I can tell you from my own personal experience, it isn't. I mean, I don't claim to be an expert on beer, but I've been drinking beer quite a few years now, coming up on 30, and I can tell you it's not the same. It was a better product in 19 what are we, and we're in 2016. 1986, it was a better product than it is in 2016, at least in my opinion and my taste. And over drinking beer over that time span and drinking thousands and thousands of different brands and different beers, PBR is crap.
Well, on May 24th of this year, I will be 51, so that will make 30 years of legal drinking for me.
Wow. Yeah, there you go, Tom. 30 years, huh? Time flies, huh?
Yeah, it does. I tell you what. In fact, the way I was going in my early 20s, I think if I hadn't met my wife when I did, I probably wouldn't have got this far.
Well, the good thing about that, and the good thing about the just the era that we were born in, we saw it all. Really, we were at the very beginning of the craft beer revolution, and we've been through it the whole way. And a lot of these people now that started drinking in the 90s and the 2000s. I mean, yeah, they're all a part of it, and it's a very welcoming group of people. But um, we've discussed this too. It seems like the last 8 to 10 years or something has become a real snarkiness that's come about in the craft beer world that I don't particularly care for, and a lot of it's got to do with this hipster movement and all that crap. But yeah, it's not the same as it used to be, and even with it becoming more popular and more mainstream, it's a double-edged sword with that, because you have these people now with the whale chasers and all that crap and the tickers and that kind of horse shit, and having to wait in line for fucking 8 hours to get a fucking release of a beer, and you get two bottles, and that shit just didn't exist in the past. And I got to tell you, I don't like that trend, and I just avoid all that crap at all costs, and I know you do too.
Yeah, I do. I hate that actually. But here's the problem: a lot of folks love that part of it. And they just, I mean, they look forward to standing in line year after year. I just refuse to. For me, I mean, listen, if you want to stand in line for, Bourbon County Stout, be my guest. But I mean, I was able to walk into Mother's. I was able to walk right into the brewery, buy a case of MILF, and walk the hell out. I was able to buy a 4-pack of an 11% 50 IBU barrel-aged imperial stout that's aged in 5 different spirit barrels for $15 a 4-pack instead of $15 for one beer. I mean, for me, you could make the argument, well, it's kind of apples to oranges, Tom. Yeah, I understand it's not quite the same beer, but the principle's the same. I've got a quality barrel-aged beer that I did not have to stand in line for, and there are others out there.
Yeah, true. So here's something I want to ask you, because you've been pretty much doing these video beer reviews for a number of years now. How many years have you been doing actually, Tom?
About 5.
5. Okay, this whole beer tuber YouTube beer review thing, what's your opinion on that? What do you think? You think that's a plus or a minus when it comes to the beer culture in the world? I've got some opinions on it. I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. I think it's actually exposed a lot more people to beer. But I think some of the beer reviews that are out there are some of the absolute worst things I've ever seen. I've seen so much misinformation and so many people that have absolutely no clue what they're doing or what they're talking about. I think in some aspects, it's been detrimental to craft beer because it's dumbed down beer knowledge. It really has. You know, I've said this before, and Eric Beer Biker said it as well. Just because you have a video camera doesn't necessarily mean you should be making videos. Okay, because I've seen this time after time after time, and I won't mention names, but there are people that are considered like pioneers and legends of the beer tubing community that have made some of the absolute worst beer videos I've ever seen in my life. They have really, really dumbed down the beer culture. They've dumbed down the knowledge of beer. And again, maybe I'm jaded because my source of information for beer was Michael Jackson. I came up in the beer community, the beer culture, learning about beer by watching The Beer Hunter and reading Michael Jackson's books. And I got to tell you, I think most, for me, 99% of video beer reviews are absolute crap.
Well, they are, and I think the problem is how you want to present yourself. To be honest, I've never presented myself as a beer reviewer. I present myself as commentary. My videos are meant to be entertainment, and I try to throw some information out there. But the problem is you've got so many people out there that are actually trying to pass themselves off as experts. If you're looking for expert opinion, the only thing you should be doing are reading Michael Jackson's books. There are a very, very small handful of other worthy writers. But for the most part, if you really want to understand craft beer, the origins of craft beer, you want to understand craft beer styles, you need to be reading some Michael Jackson. You don't need to be watching anybody on YouTube. If you want to be entertained, if you have a mild curiosity about a particular beer, another a so-called beer reviewer is doing, watch the video. But if you're looking for actual knowledge, you're looking in the wrong place. And this is coming from a guy that's got about 1,900 videos out. I'm telling you, I never try to give misinformation, and I try to give as much accurate information as I can. But at the end, I'm giving you my opinion, and that's the problem. Is a lot of these folks are passing off their opinion as absolute fact. And all they're giving you is their opinion, no matter how much they want to read off of Wikipedia.
Right. Yeah, and I agree with you. But some people buy it. They buy into the hype, and some of these publishing companies have actually put people that you would never expect to write a book, actually writing a book. I mean, I don't know how you can write a book about stouts and porters when you've never been to Ireland. And you've never been to the Guinness Brewery, you've never been to England, and you've never been to any of the porter or stout breweries in England. I mean, how can somebody like me, who's been in this for 30 years or close to 30 years, and who's been to Ireland and has been to England and been to breweries and I've been to Guinness, how can I look at a book who's someone who's supposed to be telling me about stouts and porters, and they've never even been to the brewery in Ireland? I mean, I don't get that.
Well, I mean, there are a lot of beer reviewers out there, especially a lot of the early guys that ignored style altogether. I mean, they're talking about beer as if it's all one thing. I don't know how you can ignore style.
Yeah, that's the funny part, Tom. The guy that ignored style and said style doesn't matter ends up writing a book about style.
Well, that's funny. Yeah, that's the
well, it's not funny. It's if you know anything about beer, it's really pathetic, is what it is.
I just think it's not just YouTube though. It's social media sites. I mean, you've got Beer Advocate, Rate Beer that have just incredibly inaccurate information. You can look up. I mean, they do offer some facts if you're looking for a specific place to go. But if you're looking at beer reviews, you're going to see some incredibly inaccurate stuff. And a lot of people base their purchases off of these sites, which is completely bizarre to me.
It's a joke. It's Beer Advocate is an absolute joke. Rate Beer, I think, less so, but both of them. It's opinion. It's content. These sites are built on the content of its members. It's the
Yeah.
members' opinion. And I think some people go to those sites, okay, because they want to get some specifics on a style, but and then, you know, what they get is they want to get a consensus, like you know, okay, how many people rate this beer this way, and then it must be good. Then let me go get it. Of course, we've both argued, don't go by anybody else's opinion. You know, if you don't want to risk the money, buy a single and try one and go with your own opinion. But yeah, I find Beer Advocate absolutely useless. I find Rate Beer absolutely useless. I've used Rate Beer just to find places, just to get some addresses, and that's it.
Yeah.
We said this on the last one, and again, I don't want to repeat myself, but it bears repeating. All this information is available at your fingertips with a few keystrokes. There are brewery websites, there are beer blogs. Go to the brewery website. Why do you have to go through a third party? Go
Yeah.
to the source
Yeah.
yourself. Go to the brewery website yourself.
Yes,
You
I've
don't
said
have
the exact same thing. I agree. Go to the brewery website, look up
you,
the facts. Don't get somebody's opinion. Yeah, I
you
agree.
don't need a filter. There's no need for a filter. Get the information yourself. Learn yourself. Educate thyself. It isn't difficult. Okay, you know, we're not reinventing the wheel here. We're talking about beer.
And if you want to learn about beers and beer styles, don't look at these sites. Don't look at social media. Don't watch guys like me. Read Michael Jackson. That's where you're going to learn about styles. If you want to be entertained, watch the guys on YouTube. But don't look to those folks for facts.
And here's another thing I'd like to say. If you want to put yourself out there as a YouTube beer reviewer, or if you want to put yourself out there as a beer blogger, or anything to do with any kind of hobby or interest that you have, and you want to be a critic and you want to review people's products and you want to talk about breweries or whatever, be prepared to be criticized yourself. And if you can't take negative criticism, if all you like is when people have nothing but good things to say about you, you need to get out of this hobby, because you need to grow a thick skin, because there are going to be people in the world that aren't going to agree with you and aren't going to like you, and you're going to need to be able to take the slings and arrows. And if your mind is so fragile that you can't, you need to go fuck off in plain English.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've been criticized plenty, but yeah, I mean, people are, no matter what you do, people are going to like you, and people are not going to like you. Again, I think you just have to keep remembering that everything I say, everything anybody that calls themselves a beer reviewer is saying, is their opinion. And that the problem is, a lot of these folks want to pass everything off they say as absolute fact. They want to act like Moses carrying the tablets down. Just because that's the way you happen to see a particular beer doesn't mean you're absolutely right. So, don't criticize somebody for seeing it a little bit differently.
Well, that too, and don't necessarily buy the little net personas that people have created from themselves. I mean, here's an example I'll give you, okay? You know, if you want to portray yourself as this nice, gentle, good old country boy, that's fine. But don't put on your social media site um, a picture of you as a teenager with your high school ID saying "Save Bernard Getz," who was a man who shot 3 unarmed black teenagers, right or wrong, on a subway because he thought he was being mugged, and then fled, and then was, eventually acquitted. If you have something that shows that you supported Bernard Getz, don't be surprised if some people might have some questions about you, because now you're saying, "Oh, I'm a nice guy, and why are people saying these things about me?" Well, if you call somebody a gleeful Bantu savage, okay, and then you take that down because you don't have the balls to stand behind what you said, don't be surprised if somebody might call you out being, questionable about some of the things you say, okay? So, this is the thing that I don't like. You got these net personas, and if you got reality, and if you're buying into the hype of the net persona, all well and good for you, but don't expect everybody to believe that crap.
Well, I mean, I think there are some positives about social media, and we've had this conversation before. But, I've been able to meet a lot of folks from social media that I wouldn't have met otherwise. I've been able to try a lot of beers I hadn't wouldn't have been able to otherwise. But the problem is, yeah, it does allow you a lot like a dating website to try to reinvent yourself. And sometimes it is hard to tell who's being honest and who isn't. My problem is that I can't hide who I am. I'm just a short, fat, obnoxious guy on social media, or if you happen to meet me in person, you're going to get exactly the same thing. So.
Yeah, well, people who know me and they've met me and they're like, well, why don't you use your real name, and why are you hiding behind your little persona? Well, I'm in a position where, I've got things where I can't, and there's reasons I can't. You know why I can't, Tom. So I'm in positions that I've got certain responsibilities that dictate that people shouldn't know who I am. Okay, it's that simple, and that's all you need to know. But the people that I've met on social media and people who know me in my real life, I'm not hard to find. They know who I am. So whatever. But enough of that nonsense.
So there we go. So any final words to close out this session, Red?
Well, Canadian Club Black is a very good Canadian blended whiskey. I would highly recommend it. I don't know why a Canadian would be angry like your pal is angry, but he needs to get over it, because most Canadians are really, really fine people. Like I said before, I love Canada. I've had nothing but positive experience with Canada, and I like their products, and I like that country, and I'll be happy to drink a much more Canadian Black, and I'd love to go to Canada again. So
It's actually been about 20, I guess 23 years or so since. Yeah, yeah. My wife says she'll go with you. That was the last time I was in Canada. I was going to tell a story earlier, and I got sidetracked. But I want to tell it quick before we sign off. When I was about 24, 25 years old, I actually toured with a circus for a few years. And but on one of the tours, we went up into Ontario, Canada. And we were there in February, and it was colder than the Well Diggers, Keister, and the Klondikes. Holy Moses, it was freezing. We would play hockey rinks, right? Hockey rinks. We're inside a hockey rink. We're bundled up, freezing our keisters off, and my job was to sell snow cones. So I'm standing at my snow cone stand, and I can't sell a snow cone at all. But I put the snow cones in a tray, and I walked them out to the stand, and I sold 10 trays before before intermission. They will buy the snow cones and they will eat the snow cones freezing, but they're not going to come to you and get them. But that was at one point where that's when I tried a lot of other Canadian beers. I kind of went a long way around the barn to say that, but there you go. So those are my final words. This is Tom the Beer Whisperer. We're gonna close the pub.